Hello everyone, welcome to Worchester Street. I hope you enjoy your stay. I'd like to give a very special welcome to my 1,000 new subscribers from my collaboration with Unit 522. Welcome, and I hope you enjoy your stay here. With that being said, let's get started. I heard the sound of tapping on glass. I thought it was from the basement window until I heard it come from the mirror again. I was standing in the damp basement holding the picture loosely in my hand, my mouth dry. Sam stood at the top of the stairs, motioning furiously for me to leave. I turned my attention to the table in the corner. On top of it sat an ornate vanity mirror half covered by a dusty sheet. The tapping rang out from it again, sounding like fingernails on glass. I'm getting ahead of myself. If you want to understand what led me and Sam to that house, I need to start at the beginning. My mother and aunt both died when I was very young, leaving me and my cousin Sam orphaned. Apparently, all our family members disappeared into thin air after that, so we both grew up in the foster system here in West Virginia. To be brief, life growing up sucked. We were tossed around from home to home every few years, but we eventually got through it. Sam and I learned that we could only trust each other. Well, each other and our caseworker, Miss Montgomery. She'd always looked out for us when it was time to change houses. And if a foster home was getting particularly bad, I knew I could call her and she'd move heaven and earth to help us. Sam and I both decided to head to Marshall University once we graduated from high school. We'd been going there for a few semesters when I got a call out of the blue from Miss Montgomery. She told me that she'd been looking into my family again. I'd done some research on them myself in my teens, but I found absolutely nothing. My last name is Galloway, which isn't very common, but still, every search I made returned thousands of results that I didn't know how to sift through. With my past experience, I wasn't overly enthusiastic about Miss Montgomery's call. She told me that she found some records that matched everything we knew about my mom and aunt. I asked her what it was that she'd found, and she told me that there was some factory in a town nearby that had been owned by a man named Richard Galloway, who'd been recorded as having 2 daughters with my aunt and mom's name. Everything fit. I brought up the idea of checking out the factory with Sam when he came home from his classes that afternoon. "Come on, man," he said. "Even if we do have relatives, they abandoned us for 20 years. Why would you even want to meet them?" I shrugged. Maybe they didn't know about us. Maybe they have money. Maybe a lot of things. It took some convincing, but eventually Sam agreed to check the factory out. It was a few hours of driving, but eventually we reached the town. It was all but abandoned, full of shuttered factories and burnt down homes. I followed my phone's GPS to the factory that Miss Montgomery had mentioned and found that it was abandoned as well. I took a picture of the factory door, which you can see here. Sam looked at me with a raised eyebrow. "Well, it looks like we drove all this way for nothing." "Oh no," I said. "We're going in for sure." "Do you want to get arrested again?" Sam said. "You'll get kicked out of college, you know." "We won't get arrested," I said with a grin. "Besides, this factory is ours by birthright. We'd just be breaking one of our own windows." Sam shook his head, but followed me as I walked behind the factory. I took another picture, which you can see here. Luckily, one of the doors behind the building was loose. It only took 2 good kicks for it to break and fall inside. The floor of the factory was littered with broken glass. I knelt down to take a closer look and saw that they weren't just pieces of glass, but bits of broken mirrors. Thousands of little pieces of mirror sparkled from where they lay on the ground. I saw a stack of frames sitting in a corner of the factory floor as well. "So what is this, a mirror factory?" Sam asked. I shrugged. "Looks that way." We walked around the place. The high windows let in thick beams of sunlight that sparkled off the mirror pieces on the floor. We found a door along one wall of the building. I tried the handle and found it locked. I shot Sam a look and gestured towards the door. He rolled his eyes, but stepped up to the door and slammed his shoulder into it hard. The rusted hinges snapped, and the door fell into the room with a heavy thud, revealing an office with a large wooden desk. "Well, if there's anyone around to hear, they definitely heard that," he said. We reached the desk, and I opened the drawers. There were some office supplies, paper, stuff like that. Then, as my hand reached the back of the drawer, I felt a wet piece of paper. I pulled out my hand and saw I was holding an old letter. A letter addressed to a man named Richard Galloway. I didn't recognize the address. "Do you think that's where our grandpa lived?" Sam asked. He hadn't even finished his sentence when we heard it. A tapping noise, like fingernails on glass, echoed around the empty factory. I stuck my head out the office door and looked around to see what was making it, but everything looked the same. "Hey," I called out. The tapping stopped immediately. A feeling swept over me that I can't explain. You know that feeling you get when you get caught somewhere you know you shouldn't be? That mixture of sheepishness and shame? It was like a hostile version of that. "We need to get out of here," I said. Then another sound started. A soft whipping noise, the kind of noise that you hear when you swing a thin branch through the air. It sounded like a person was standing in the middle of the factory, swinging a long stick through the air. Again, I saw no movement. Then the noise got louder and closer. "Time to go, Sam," I shouted and stuffed the letter into my pocket. The whipping got faster and more violent. As we bolted for the door, I saw a mirror hung on the wall shatter into a dozen pieces that crashed to the floor. They tinkled as they hit the ground. The whipping continued until we got out of the factory and into the car. We sped away, not knowing what to make of it. "What was that?" Sam shouted. It wasn't a question. I shook my head. "I don't know." Sam gripped the steering wheel hard, his knuckles white. I pulled out the letter that I'd taken from the desk and looked at the address again. Then I put the information into my phone's GPS and flipped it to show Sam. "The house is just an hour south of here in the mountains," I said quietly. I fought to keep my hands from shaking. "Are you crazy? Were you not just in that factory with me?" Sam asked. "There was something not right happening in there." A few minutes passed in silence. "Haven't you always wanted to know, Sam?" I asked. "Didn't it make you mad when we had to move again and again?" I sighed. "I want to know what happened to them, just so I can know if I should be spitting on their graves or not." Another long moment passed in silence. Sam shot a look at me and nodded, breathing out hard. "Fine. Where is this place?" The highway led into a valley, and soon we were snaking back and forth up an old country road. The day was winding down, and soon the twilight sun was hidden behind a layer of thick fog that covered the valley like a blanket. The road led us up the mountainside, finally ending at a house sitting on a hill. It was, without exaggeration, the most impressive structure I had ever seen in person. It was made of old brick and stone, and it looked like it was clinging to the side of the mountain with its fingernails. How has this thing not just fallen off into the valley? I thought out loud. I took a picture which you can see here. There was a plaque with a crest next to the door that read Galloway. I knocked on the front door and waited. The thick fog swirling around the house muted the normal sounds of the forest. The silence rang out, almost physical in its intensity. Sam and I stood in front of the doors and heard nothing. I reached for the handle and was surprised to find that the door opened smoothly. The inside of the house looked like it hadn't been visited in at least a decade. Several of the large windows that spanned the walls of the living room were broken, and a thick layer of dust covered every surface. I didn't notice them at first because of the dust, but soon I realized what I was seeing. Almost every surface of the room was covered in huge rectangular mirrors. Sam walked up to the fireplace that dominated one of the walls and picked up a picture frame that sat on top of it. He rubbed the dirt off and looked at it. His eyebrows shot up, and he looked up at me. "You were right," he whispered. I ran up to the picture and immediately recognized my mother and aunt with a man who I assumed was Richard. My mom was probably in her late teens. "So this place is really—" I trailed off. "I don't know," Sam said. His voice was thick with emotion. We walked around the house then, exploring the different rooms. It looked like it had been built at the turn of the last century, though only abandoned for a few years. We eventually found the basement of the house. It looked like it was a later addition and was made out of damp, mossy concrete. I walked down the steps to it, but Sam shook his head and said that he preferred to stay up top. An ornate vanity mirror half covered with a sheet sat on a table in the corner. There was also a bed and a small dresser. I walked up to the dresser and opened some drawers. They were all empty, except for the last. There was a single photograph laying in the drawer, face down. I picked it up, turned it over, and felt all the blood leave my face. It was a picture of my mom and aunt, with a young me and Sam sitting on their laps. Next to us in the picture was a shape that I didn't understand, a black silhouette of a woman hanging upside down in the air next to us. Somehow, the picture made the silhouette seem like it was moving violently. Here's a picture of that. That's when I heard the sound of tapping on glass. I thought it was from the basement window, until I heard it come from the mirror again. I turned my attention to the table in the corner. The tapping rang out clearly from the ornate vanity mirror, sounding like fingernails on glass. Every hair on my body stood up. I know you've heard that expression 1,000 times, but it's used because it's true. I felt like a dog whose hackles had risen. The methodical tapping slowly increased its intensity until it sounded like someone was drumming their fingernails on the mirror, hard. Sam motioned violently from the top of the stairs, but I was frozen where I stood. Then, the whipping noise from the factory rang out, and the mirror exploded into a dozen shards that scattered around the room. I ran up the stairs, still clutching the photo in my hand, and Sam and I sprinted for the front door. The sound of tapping echoed from every mirror throughout the house. It was followed by the methodical whip. We reached the living room. The front doors closed, and we ran for it. A thunderous crack rang out, and every mirror in the room shattered in unison, showering us with bits of broken glass and mirror. The whipping approached us from behind just as we reached the door. The sound was violent and fast. It sounded like a dozen people each had a supple stick that they were swinging back and forth as hard and fast as they could. We ran to the car and set off down the road as fast as we could. It's been a few days now, and I don't know what to think about what happened. I don't know what that thing was. I don't know how to get more information. If I find out anything else, I'll update you all here. If you've enjoyed this story, please leave a like and subscribe. A lot of the comments that I've been receiving have been requests to make part 2s of different stories that I've written so far on this channel. If you'd like to see a part 2 for a story that I've written, leave a comment below. I'll be taking a look at which ones get the most votes. Another shout out to 002 Archer, my first Patreon supporter. I personally write, produce, and edit every story on this channel, and I'm trying to monetize my writing. If you can, please support me on Patreon. I have rewards that range from having your name read out at the end of a video, to naming a character in a story. I've added a new tier where I will put you in a story that I write. I'm very happy to see so many of you from Unit 522's channel come over and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and as always, I hope you've enjoyed your time on Worchester Street.